I've been a Yu-Gi-Oh player for the most part of my time playing card games. Played a bit of Hearthstone, looked into Magic for a bit, but nothing really captured my attention in a similar manner to normal summoning Southbound for the 14th format in a row. That was until roughly a month ago when me and a friend had a very brief chat about the Pokemon TCG. I don't have much history with the Pokemon TCG, outside of roughly knowing how to play, having, collected the cards as a kid as probably anyone else, and a general liking to how they adapted the 6v6 Pokemon battles into a TCG form. But boy, was I about to fall into a rabbit hole. As a small disclaimer, this video will be my thoughts and takes on the Pokemon TCG after roughly a month of very casual expanded format play. But with this disclaimer out of the way, let's start at the beginning with the deck you'll be handed or putting together at the start. You thought decks in Yu-Gi-Oh were hyper consistent? Do I have news for you? Searching 5, drawing 6 or more, or just generally +1s? Almost anything feels possible with the abilities and supporters on offer in the Pokemon TCG. Things that would be ungodly broken in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are limited in the Pokemon TCG by either being a V-Star ability that is once per game, or a supporter of which you can only activate one per turn. Which honestly, even if you only have maybe a singular copy of a decent Pokemon V, V-Star, EX, or something similarly powerful, whatever the general gimmick mechanic of that generation may be, gives you the option to easily and efficiently build around it and still get some wins in. I personally got carried through a lot of my early games by the power of Weirdeer V, with its ability that lets it attach energy from your other Pokemon to itself if it moves into your active slot, and move Psy-Shield Bash, which does more damage the more energies are attached to it, comboing pretty well into some high impact Deer sweeps. Another portion of deck building that I have picked up from looking, at top decks and just generally playing is running Pokemon with beneficial abilities as kind of continuous spells, to put it in Yu-Gi-Oh terms. Usually when you're building a deck in the Pokemon TCG, you're focused on one or two key Pokemon to do most of the damage, maybe a couple situational ones to deal with specific threats, but what to do with the rest of your board or bench space? Easy. You play Pokemon with good abilities that apply or activate even while that Pokemon is benched. Top tier Lugia decks, for example, run a copy of a Dunsparce with an ability that removes the weakness of normal type Pokemon. But in my time playing, I've seen a Gardevoir card be very popular, and no, not for those reasons, but because its ability reduced the damage your Pokemon took from opposing Pokemon V, which I honestly think is something pretty cool that allows some Pokemon to shine through their utility less than their fighting power, and also opens up a lot of options in deck building. Generally, I think there's a good bit of depth to deck building, and due to most of the powerful consistency supporters and items being generic, you can make a lot to, I'd almost say, any Pokemon work for casual play at least. With our deck established, let's get into a game and start where a game usually starts, with the coin toss, which to my surprise actually makes a difference and isn't just there to decide the game altogether, since going first and or second have their own benefits. Generally, I'd say going first allows for more setup and going second allows for more early tempo. Since when you're the one to go first, you already have a turn where your Pokemon are in play and can start looking to evolve your Pokemon on a turn 3. Similar situation with energies, you already have a turn to place one onto the field, allowing you access to stronger moves faster. On the other hand, going second gives you, just like in Yu-Gi-Oh, the ability to attack, and getting first hits in can sometimes prove decisive. But the biggest thing that going second has is the ability to activate supporter cards, which are probably some of the strongest cards in the game due to some of the previously mentioned consistency boosts or even other utility effects. At this point, I'd like to insert a small hot take, because I honestly think the mulligan rules in the Pokemon TCG are brutal. Basically, if you don't open any basic Pokemon to play from your hand at the start of the game, you will be taking a mulligan. So far so good, right? Well, it doesn't just stop right there, because for every time you had to shuffle your hand back and draw a new one, your opponent can draw an additional card, which I honestly think is pretty crazy. It's Possibly to keep out quote-unquote degenerate stuff, but maybe the people actively playing the Pokemon TCG can elaborate on this in the comments. But this to me is probably the most brutal part of the game. But let's get back on track now. Games usually tend to take a couple of turns, generally due to prize cards being the main win con. Those are 6 cards both players lay face down onto the field from each other's deck at the start and can add one of those to their hand when they KO a Pokemon. But additionally, certain limitations being put on your turn also help with that, so let's get into those. I've already talked about whoever takes the first turn not getting to activate a supporter and their limitations, but haven't specified on energies and how those work. The most common form of energy is the basic energy. Pretty self-explanatory, since it gives your Pokemon 1 energy for the type depicted on it. Special energies are pretty self-explanatory as well. Those usually go a bit farther than your basic energy, be it just providing 2 colorless energies or specific effects outlined on the card like damage reductions, recycling, or even searching. But without the use of other cards, you're only able to place 1 energy onto one of your Pokemon per turn. So setting up for stronger moves takes a bit of time or a bit of help. Evolutions are, as I've kind of alluded to earlier, also something you cannot do at your own leisure, since not only does a Pokemon need to be in play for a turn to evolve, but since evolution also treats it as a new Pokemon, you'd need to wait another turn to get a second stage evolution into play, even if you have it in hand. But there's usually 1 or 2 cards that can help with that. Item cards are probably the thing that are treated the most liberally, since you can activate as many of those per turn as you want. But those tend to also be comparatively weak to supporter cards, so that makes sense in my opinion. Since items usually end up being even zeros in searching, while having more precise costs or restrictions to what you can search with them. Or, other utility effects. So generally, your turn will consist of you drawing a card, then being able to activate cards and abilities, evolve your Pokemon, attach energy, maybe swap your active Pokemon with one of your benched ones, and will end if you decide to pass or attack with your active Pokemon. Which does make for pretty good gameplay flow, to be honest. Since keeping track of energies, potential supporters your opponent may have, keeps the whole thing, on the one hand, predictable, for the lack of a better turn, since you're working within the restrictions of what, is possible in a turn, but also keeps games open, because there's always certain cards that can definitely swing the tempo in a very huge manner. But in general, gameplay I think can be perfectly summarized by keep it simple stupid, where I feel like it's inherently easy enough to pick up for anyone, also its intended audience, but it allows for enough depth to keep experienced players engaged, since keeping track of energies, maximizing certain draws, or the sequencing of your cards, specifically supporters, is highly important, which honestly I think makes for some pretty rewarding gameplay, especially once you start getting into it. A couple minor things before we wrap this one up though. I played all of my games on Pokemon TCG Online, which is a pretty solid platform. Personally, a huge fan of the fact that you can redeem IRL products in the game. That is something that I think so many more TCGs should do. Konami. Konami. But it definitely is a master duel in terms of how much resources you get at the beginning, and feels very grindy to acquire new cards. But on the topic of those cards, artwork, I think to no one's surprise, looks crazy good. Pokemon full arts are probably some of the universally well-perceived cards, and for good reason. Those things look absolutely amazing. Also, with, how often we've seen these creatures, the varying art styles really help in keeping things fresh. And to my surprise, the biggest small thing, move names are hilarious and an absolute goldmine. From classics to Flamethrower and Bugbite, you will also find epics like Close Quarters Shooting, or my personal favorite, the Creepy Crawly Congregation from a Wurmple. But now, let's get to summarizing this thing. As you can probably tell already by the tone of this video, I am really enjoying the Pokemon TCG as it is. The one thing I was already well aware of before getting into it was that I really liked how they adapted some of the main game mechanics into a TCG form, be it evolutions or, as mentioned at the start, mainly how the prize cards are a really good way to emulate a 6v6 Pokemon battle. So this past month really has shown me what a fun and accessible TCG this is, from learning the mechanics, but also, of course, actually playing the game. Games usually are pretty fast to pick up steam due to how hyper-consistent decks are, since some of the supporters read like actual custom cards for a Yu-Gi-Oh player, be it adding multiple cards or drawing some 6 or 7. On the other hand, games also aren't over in only a couple of turns and have some decent build up until you start really taking each other's board apart and start claiming that final prize card from your opponent. It almost feels like the best of both worlds from Yu-Gi-Oh! And MTG in a sense, where you're playing a rather slow, resource-oriented game, but it's also fast to pick up because decks are really consistent and get to their win cons fairly fast. I think the main shocker for me as a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player especially was that there's no definitive best pick between going first or second, since especially in the modern environment of play of Yu-Gi-Oh! There has been an increasing importance on winning the die roll and actually going first. Of course, this can all look wildly different on the competitive level, and everyone that plays the game, feel free to tell me how wrong I am in the comments down below. Small editor's note here, I have played while putting this video together against the Fusion Strike Mew deck and the Lugia Vista deck a couple of times, and you don't need to tell me in the comments anymore how wrong I am. But overall, it's been a very fun experience, kinda reliving something I previously didn't have much experience with, but kinda teetered on the edge of for a long time. And honestly, with how much I've been enjoying Scarlet and Violet, I'm really tempted in getting my hands on one of those Koraidon Elite Trainer boxes once those drop at the end of March, because damn, those things are really cool. Also, the Spidops card looks sick. So, let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments below, and maybe the Pokemon TCG veterans can explain some of the things like why Mulligan rules are the way they are, because really, what the fuck is up with that? Anyways, thank you all so very much for watching, especially if you've made it this far. I'll probably leave you with the rest of the gameplay that has been running in the background if there's some left. And we'll see you guys again next time. But until then, goodbye.